Ted, I'm very glad that you were able to come and do this interview. An article in the Scarsdale Inquirer had as its headline, 81-year-old psychoanalyst publishes his first novel. You certainly don't look like you're 81 years old, but I think that's accurate. This is your first novel. So I'd be interested in hearing more about your history as a writer, because I know this may have been your first novel, but you're not your first non-psychoanalytic publication.
Thank you, Arnie. I'm very glad to be here and talk with you this evening. It's a great pleasure. To try to respond to your question, I've always been interested in writing. As a high school kid, I wrote a lot for the school paper, a column called On the Bench, where I was fixed most of the time as an athlete.
Which high school?
I went to Horace Mann School in the old days.
Aha. An elite school.
It was, the faculty was some of the finest minds of the 13th century. It was a very old-fashioned 3 R's kind of school at the time.
Wasn't this near Columbia? Where was it?
No, it was up in Riverdale.
In Riverdale. Oh, Horace Mann, of course. Yes, yes.
But it also had great sports teams.
Yes.
Really why I was there. But I was interested in writing. I always had that as a kind of avocational interest. I toyed with the idea of being an English professor and writing essays about various writers and poets, but decided that was a little too narrow. But when I was in medical school, since it was a difficult time to grind away, as you well know, at all the hard sciences.
Which medical school?
I was at the University of Chicago.
Oh, we are. Yeah, okay.
I began to fool around with writing a little fiction, and they were mostly stories about doctors and medical students and the world that I knew then. And to my surprise, a couple of them were published in Harper's Magazine and other small magazines and were anthologized. So I had a fairly good start as a writer.
Do you have copies of these?
I probably do someplace.
I would love to get them and make them available to the psychoanalytic community.
I probably do have them.
Yeah, that would be terrific.
I'll ask my wife.
Good.
But then, of course, as we all did, get caught up in psychoanalytic training and all the requirements thereof and all the writing about cases and so on. And I got interested in writing professionally too, but I never lost my interest in writing fiction. And I had the good fortune to study with Frank O'Connor, the great Irish short story writer, for one summer at Harvard. And as an undergraduate, I had Robert Penn Warren as a teacher. So I'd learned a good deal about writing short story, but I hadn't written anything longer. But when things eased up a little bit and I had a little more time, I decided to try my hand at writing a novel or something, a longer story, novelette, whatever it turned out to be. And I didn't exactly have a subject matter, but as soon as I sat down to think about it, all the memories about my Horace Mann days and all the friends and colleagues and the girls from Fieldston, all of that came back, and it was very easy to get into that world again. And so that it became rather easily the idea for the story. But the writing of it, of course, is a whole other matter. That took a long time.
Now, how long ago was it that you started writing
I
it?
started this about 4 years ago.
Oh.
And I had some good fortune being able to get hold of an author-editor. He's written about 19 novels, who helped me a little bit with the shaping of the book and generally had a little bit of support. But it was fun to do on holidays and weekends, and to relive those days, those late adolescent days, which I think all of us have sort of in one way or another deeply embedded in our memories and our experiences because they're so powerful at that time.
Yeah, I know some of the friendships during those times tend to be very enduring.
And that's true. Some of my closest friends really do stem from that time. And as I mentioned in the article that you talked about, the Scarsdale article, I had a very, very close friend who was a teammate of mine on a variety of sports. And he was very involved in the high school years and relived them over and over again. So whenever we visited together, we would go back over some of the highlights and the low points of our careers at Horace Mann and on the ball teams and so on, with the girls from the private school mostly. And then he got sick, he died, and I had no companion to talk with about these days. So it was sort of writing to him in some way that
So he was your fleece.
he was my fleece.
Now, what about I know you had a career in journalism. You told me about writing for the Daily Worker.
Yeah, I came from a family, as I think you did too, of sort of left thinking, left-wing people.
Yes.
Flirting with the Communist Party, with the American Labor Party.
Yes, Vito Marcantonio.
Yes, right, and with PM and Max Lerner.
Right, PM, yes.
And I wanted to do some sports writing as an extension of what I was doing in high school. But of course no one was going to hire a young kid. But my family knew the sports editor by chance of the Daily Worker. And I went to see him and he said, "We don't have anybody to go out to Ebbets Field. Are you game for that?" And I said, "Sure." So I used to ride the subway out to the ball games. And
You lived in Manhattan.
I lived in Manhattan.
And then you went to Brooklyn.
Right, I went to Brooklyn. Of course, the Daily Worker didn't have the same press credentials as the other papers. So I had no place in the press box, so I'd sit in the stands. And after the game, I'd rush to a phone booth and call in the story. But it was a good experience, because writing journalism, even that kind of journalism, gives you...
Now, what years was this that you covered the Dodgers?
I must have done that in, it must have been about 48, 49.
40.
At the time that the story takes place.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. So that was before, or after, who dropped the third strike? Mickey Owen, yes.
42.
42. I think that's my earliest baseball memory, is in 42. I guess I was 8 years old. So now, were you a Dodger fan?
Actually,
Or
no.
a Giant fan?
I got to like the Dodgers as I went out there each day, and got more and more familiar with the players, and with Hilda Chester sitting in the stands, who was the
Yes.
big lady with the cowbell.
Right.
And so I got to like the Bums.
Uh-huh.
But for all these years I was a Giant fan.
Uh-huh.
So when Durocher moved over to the Giants, it was a huge, huge event for all of us. A kind of strange betrayal, like, I don't know, Von Ribbentrop leading the U.S. forces or something like that. But it was a talking point, which in a way had always stayed with me as a kind of metaphor for the surprising and the unexpected and sometimes the disturbing, but which turned out quite well in the end.
Now, Robinson was on the team by then, yes? Hmm?
Yes.
Yes, so it was Roy Campanella, Roy Hodges, Pee Wee Reese, Ed Stanky, Cookie Labagetto, Dixie Walker,
Snyder.
Duke Snyder, and Reeser. What was?
Pete Reese.
And Pete Reeser. Was that the team that you were?
That was essentially the team.
That was essentially the team. Yeah.
And really a very elegant team,
Yes.
except for Ducky Medwick.
Yes. Yes. Right. So you've been interested in baseball a long time.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's hard not to be interested in baseball growing up in New York. Well, I've read the novel. It's really a wonderful book. I mean, its associations are to Salinger and to Henry Roth, and it has some of those qualities of the pain of being an adolescent. And to what extent was that autobiographical? What were the well springs that you drew on in writing this novel?
Well, it's not autobiographical in the strict sense of the word, but of course, as we all know, you can't write anything that doesn't come from that's serious. It's bound to come from the heart.
The feelings.
And the feelings are bound to be there, and they also, some of the experiences changed and altered, but fundamentally there. And but a lot of it is also imagined, because I think, for example, the heroine, or the main figure in the book, the young woman, is not anyone I really knew, but I knew people sort of a little bit like her, who leaned in that direction towards the being the kind of leaders of the renegades, the left-wing renegades in school. And the main figure, Jonathan, has a lot of my qualities, a lot of my shyness, and a lot of my problems that I was struggling with at that time. And the kind of the uncertainty and the lack of confidence with which I struggled for a long time.
Yeah, I think that comes across, and that's what makes the book so immediate for all of us that had that experience in adolescence. You have a brother.
Yes, my brother Dan, a well-known analyst in Boston.
And also a writer.
Yes, he is.
He and his wife are written a play.
They've written a play which will be on for those who attend the meetings at
Yes.
American. It'll be done. I've seen it several times. It's really quite good. And it follows the story of a woman who was really the head of the WPA writing division, a drama division, I should say. A very interesting person, and her life story is the essence of the play, which was a tragic, comic tragedy.
Now, is this his first play?
Yes, I believe so. She, of course, is a well-known writer.
Yes.
But she has not written drama either, so it's their first play together.
So you write your first novel. Your brother writes his first play. What about your parents? What was their attitude toward literature and writing and stuff like that?
My father was not a highly educated man, but he was like a private student. He loved history and he read a great deal, but without formal education. My mother was a teacher of English and Latin, when Latin still was being taught in the public schools, which
Yes.
didn't last too long.
Yes.
And she read, and she led some groups, mostly of women, to discuss books, and she was always very interested in literature, so it came naturally to me through that.
So, like many of us, you grew up in a house with lots of books.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, what's interesting or noteworthy to me is how important you have been as a psychoanalytic writer. You have a very, very noteworthy, number of papers that you've written, and the book, The Uses of the Self, I think is one of the most important books of that time, and hopefully we may reprint it as an ebook, that is IP Books, and now you have another book that has just come out. Perhaps you could tell us about that also.
Well, this book is called The Possible Profession, The Analytic Process of Change. It was a kind of play on the idea of the impossible profession.
Right.
And it's really a collection of papers, some going as far back as maybe 15 or 20 years, some very current, and some never published before. So they are I might say, reflections of my preoccupation with a narrow aspect of the field, which has to do with the kind of unconscious communications that influence the analytic process and the analytic sessions all the time, and to study those, see how they influence both the patient and the analyst, and to try to record my own thoughts and experiences with that dimension of the work.
Well, I mean, I'm interested, or note that it has to do with the possible profession, because this conveys to me a sense of optimism that you have about psychoanalysis, and I think the sense of optimism also comes across in the novel. It has that kind of positive feeling, at least as I read it.
Well, I have I wrote a paper a couple of years ago about hope.
Oh.
Hope in psychoanalysis. And I do feel that hope is a very important thing, because as Lowell said, the analyst carries the hope for the patient and for himself, that our work is meaningful and important, and although changes in our patients and ourselves may be very slow, they are very significant. It may take a long time, but the end goal, I think, is very worthwhile. So I always felt very hopeful, even with the most troubled patient.
You know, another analyst who was very interested in hope and wrote about hope was Carl Menninger. I think there's actually a book that he wrote with hope in the title.
Well, I think his whole career is a testimony to that attitude. He started at a time when many people felt that mentally ill were relatively hopeless.
Right.
He brought to this country a hopeful and a meaningful attitude in terms of what could be done.
Yeah. I think, Ted, you've also conveyed to me that attitude, not only about our profession, about our organizations, and very often when you and I talk about these things, I see you as being more hopeful about the American Psychoanalytic and our institutes that sometimes I feel. But I think that's a very, very positive thing, and I can see why that's a hopeful attitude is a helpful attitude.
I think so, because despite all our problems, our history is we've somehow muddled through, and we've done some very good work despite all the difficulties.
Right. And I think the profession and the people who read your book need that kind of attitude. And I think that's very positive. I mean, I see this as your credo, the hopeful attitude. And I can see how this is very therapeutic for your patients.
Well, I do think it's a very important part of our work, and I remember one time our good friend Charlie Brenner was talking about lengthy analyses, and I asked him, how long would you continue with a patient who's, let's say you've seen for many, many years? He says, as long as I see a little bit of change, a little alteration here and there over the year by year, I will not give up, because I think that's a sign the person can continue to grow. I think.
Yeah, I've had personal experiences with Charlie along the same lines. In fact, I've just written a paper which includes some stuff about Charlie and about his therapeutic optimism. And I think it is very, and Charlie is that way, and I think not so much, but Jack was as well.
Yes.
They really felt they could analyze anybody, and they did. And often, where other people gave up, they said no, give it a try.
And very often that good results, although it took quite a long time.
Right. Well, thank you very much for this interview, and I hope the book continues to sell.
Thank you. I hope so too.
Okay.
Thanks.
Right.